We are going to a bit more complicated blur options, and in this lesson I'm going to talk about differences between smart blur and surface blur. They seem to be similar, but there is some differences, and I was thinking, how can I explain you this, because the way how does it works, it's kind of not really clear. So I thought I will show you on this example where we have a lot of details, and this image is really great to show you different kind of examples. And of course I'm going to start from the smart blur. I'm going to duplicate this layer at first. Let's go to filter, blur, and at the end we have two options, smart blur and surface blur, which are quite popular, and I think the blur options you're going to use the often is Gaussian blur, motion blur, and for retouching purposes will be smart blur and surface blur, which is very powerful if we want to remove, for example, some of the noise. Of course, to do the work properly, we need to use them for different techniques. When you use them in the right techniques, they give really amazing effects. So let's start from the smart blur. And we have two values here. We have radius and threshold. So radius basically is amount of the pixels. So right now I have 3 pixels, so it means it's going to blur out every 3 pixels, and one to another we have 3 pixels, so the blur will be very strong. But for this, more important is threshold, which is actually about the difference. As you can see, when I'm pulling this up, it's blurring more and more, and the reason is because threshold picks the least contrasting element of the image and the most, so you have the details over here. So when there is no difference, when there is small difference, it's not going to blur out the image really. So when we're going to make the difference higher, we're given an information that it can blur the image with bigger dissimilarities. So threshold is all about this. And let's put the threshold really high. And when I'm going to pull radius a bit higher, as you can see, it's going to blur this more till some point, only till the some point, because it depends on the size of the image. So when it peaks around 10 pixels, it's giving probably the biggest blur over here. However, when I'm going up, as you can see, it picks the bigger areas and it gives us this not really nice effect. So for the good effects, we should keep the radius really small, because it picks too big areas and we get in this really harsh effects over here. It's not really recognize this very well when we keep the radius very low. Even around 16, it can give us really nice effects, but to the best effects, the radius we always need to keep very low, so we have to pick few of the pixels, and it actually blurring the each elements. When we're going to pull down the threshold, the effect won't be so strong. For optimal effect, I always keep these two values very small. And the thing is, as the tool is called smart blur, it's really smart blur because it tries to prevent the details of the image. So it's going to blur out the flat areas, but as you can see, we have a lot of details over here which we don't want to lose. So when I'm going to hit OK, it's going to be very soft effect because the values were very small, but you're going to see that even though we blur this out, it's very similar. It's easy to notice this on the nose, but have a look over here. We have a lot of flat area, and this flat area actually become blurry. However, the details stay the same. What I need to say, I do not recommend you this for retouching purposes that way, because we never want to blur out the skin texture. And unfortunately, when you're going to use the blur, this kind of blur, smart blur, and even surface blur, it's not really right, because you need to mix this for special purposes and not to retouch the skin. You don't want to lose the details, so you're never going to use the blur for retouching images. I'm going to different image to show you really the way how surface blur is working, because as I said, it's similar. However, instead of choosing the details, it's not going to prevent the details. However, the surface blur trying to recognize the edges, and it's not blurring out the edges. That's not how Smart Blur working, because Smart Blur actually do not recognize the edges so well, but it's focused on the small details. However, what you can see from this, it's blurring the skin texture everywhere. I'm going to pull the radius up. Radius is, once again, it's big in the bigger pixels, so basically the bigger radius you're going to choose to some point, because at some point it's stopping. So we need to pick this really the optimal value for it. So you choose the radius, the amount of pixels inside you want to blur, and threshold always I'm keeping quite low, because threshold is going to be about the difference. So once again, when there is low difference, it's going to recognize the edges very well, and it's not going to break down the edges. However, when you put the threshold really high, it's not recognizing the dissimilarities anymore, because the range of the differences is actually very big. So when you pull this up, as you can see, you can actually break down the edges, and it's not going to give you really nice effect. The same when you're going to pull up the radius, it's going to pick the bigger amount of pixels, and it's going to destroy the image. So what I do recommend, no matter what you're going to do, if you want to reduce some noise, the threshold you're going to keep pretty much low to not break down the edges, and also you have to work with radius to not put this too strong. So you want to keep the edges really nice and radius in the reasonable value. As I said before, we're not using such a things to retouch the images, because the thing you can notice, it's actually very destructive. And these two tools, even if are very powerful, I'm using for totally different tasks. Actually, I prefer to sharpen the image using them, and I'm going to show you this in the next lesson. However, if I really want to use them for the image, I'm using this to reduce the noise. And I'm going to show you this right now. I'm going to open Bridge, File, Browse in Bridge, and let's find some kind of nature image, because we don't want to use this on the people, because it will be just a destructive. So let's pick this image. Maybe it's not so perfect as well. However, still we have some of the noise on the lake. So let's say you want to reduce that noise. I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to filter, blur, and sharpen blur. Of course, not that. Once again, filter, blur, and sharpen blur. Surface blur. My bad. So what is happening? Actually, you blurring this out. It's a bit too strong. I just want to reduce a bit of the noise and make this very smooth. Actually, I think I would keep this if I have to be honest with you. So the image better if there is a sky and there is some noise. I don't have many images with noise, but I just want to show you this the right way how you work with it. You don't use these tools on the skin. That's the thing you need to remember, and hit OK over here, and you will see the really nice difference between these two. So that's before and that's after. As you can see, we just smooth the lake. So we try to remove a little bit of noise, but at the same point, everywhere where we have edges, the effect stays the same. The image stays as it was before. So the thing you need to remember, Smart Blur, Surface Blur, very powerful if you want to deal with the noise.